Today we are going to look at streamers who reached their breaking point while the cameras were still rolling. From a legendary gamer whose heart gave out in the final hours of a hero's journey, to a broadcast that stayed live long after the room went silent. Let's dive straight in. It was February 19th, 2017, in Virginia Beach. Outside, the winter air was biting and still, a deep freeze that kept the streets empty and the neighborhood silent. But inside a quiet suburban home, the atmosphere was a stark contrast. It was electric, buzzing with the energy of thousands of people connected by a single fiber optic cable. The room itself was tucked away, dark and cramped, save for the intense, flickering blue light of 3 oversized computer monitors. The glow reflected off the walls in rhythmic pulses, illuminating a desk cluttered with the remnants of a long night, empty energy drink cans, crumpled snack wrappers, and a headset that hadn't been taken off in nearly an entire day. The man in the center of this neon glow was 35-year-old Brian Vinyard, known to the internet as PoShYbRiD. To the gaming community, Brian was a titan of the tactical game world of tanks. He was a father of 3 and a man with a famously gruff, unfiltered personality that hid a golden heart. This wasn't just another casual gaming session. Brian was 22 hours into a grueling, self-imposed 24-hour marathon. He wasn't doing it for fame, and he wasn't doing it for personal profit. He was doing it for the Make-A-Wish Foundation, playing to raise enough money to grant dreams for children with terminal illnesses. He was pushing his body to its absolute limit for a noble cause, completely unaware that he was currently living through his own final waking hours. As the clock ticked past 3 a.m., the stream looked like a marathon in its final, most difficult stages. Brian's face was notably pale under the weight of his headset, his eyes bloodshot and heavy, but his spirit remained stubbornly high. A donation gold bar stretched across the top of the screen, nearly filled to the brim with contributions from people moved by his dedication. In the background, the mechanical sounds of heavy tank treads and the thunderous boom of cannon fire provided a rhythmic, almost hypnotic soundtrack to the night. It was the sound of progress. The chat was moving at a frantic, blurring pace. Hundreds of viewers from across the globe were cheering him on, typing messages of support and using emojis to celebrate every victory on the digital battlefield. Brian was laughing, occasionally cracking a joke in his signature gravelly voice, and thanking donors while clenching a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. To anyone watching through their own screen, this was a triumph of human endurance. He was a hero in their eyes, and he was only 2 hours away from the finish line. Then, at approximately 3:30 a.m., after an intense match that required his full concentration, Brian leaned back in his gaming chair. He rubbed his face with both hands and let out a tired, heavy exhale that the microphone picked up with startling clarity. He looked directly into the camera lens, connecting one last time with the thousands of strangers who had been his companions for the last 22 hours. He told his audience he was stepping away for a quick smoke break, just a few minutes to breathe the cold night air and clear his head for the final 2-hour stretch. "I'll be right back, guys," he said. It was a mundane, forgettable sentence, the kind spoken thousands of times every day in the world of live streaming. He stood up, pushed his chair back, and walked out of the camera's frame. A second later, the faint, hollow click of a door closing echoed through the stream. For the next several minutes, the broadcast remained perfectly normal. His empty gaming chair sat center stage, illuminated by the blue light of the monitors, a silent monument to the grind. The World of Tanks garage screen looped on the primary monitor, showing a massive armored vehicle rotating slowly in a virtual hangar. The lo-fi background music hummed softly. The digital world was waiting patiently for its leader to return. But 5 minutes turned into 15. 15 turned into 30. In the chat, the tone began to shift in a way that felt eerily familiar to those who spend their lives online. It started with light-hearted jokes. Viewers suggested Brian had fallen asleep on the porch or that he'd gotten lost in his own house. Laughing emojis filled the screen. But as the clock hit the 1-hour mark of his absence, the humor began to evaporate. The atmosphere in the digital room turned cold. The game was still looping, the donation alerts were still occasionally pinging, and the lights were still flickering, but the silence coming from the other side of that closed door began to feel heavy. The viewers became witnesses to a haunting, static reality. Moderators began typing in all caps, trying to get Brian's attention in case he was just off camera checking his phone. Longtime friends sent him private messages that remained unread. On the screen, the harsh blue light of the monitors continued to wash over the empty chair, which looked increasingly like a void in the center of the room. A few regulars noticed that his status on the communication app Discord had switched from online to idle. The stream didn't end with a dramatic moment or a cry for help. It ended with an uncanny, automated silence that lasted for hours. Eventually, the broadcast system detected a lack of input and the stream timed out, the screen cutting to a sudden, jarring black. The hero's journey had ended in a quiet, dark hallway just a few feet away from the desk. Brian had collapsed from a heart complication, a silent failure of a body that had been pushed too far. The lethal combination of extreme sleep deprivation, acute exhaustion, and the physical stress of the 22-hour marathon had finally forced his heart to surrender. The next morning, when a close friend messaged Brian on Facebook to check on him, they didn't receive a reply from a tired gamer. They received a message from a police officer who had recovered the phone from the scene. Brian PoShYbRiD Vigneault had raised thousands of dollars for children in his final hours, proving his incredible strength of will, only to be betrayed by the very body he was pushing to be a hero. His Twitch channel was eventually memorialized, leaving behind a final archive that serves as a grim, permanent reminder of the physical cost of the digital grind and the thin line between a marathon and a tragedy. Next, we travel to the heart of Europe for a story that redefined the dangers of extreme streaming and forced a nation to question the true price of digital entertainment. It is the tale of a man who tried to turn his life into a never-ending show, only to find that when the cameras are always on, there is no one left to call for help when the lights finally dim. It was August 2025 in a quiet residential district of France. Outside, the summer heat hung heavy over the streets, but inside a cluttered apartment on the outskirts of the city, the air was stale and filled with the relentless hum of high-powered cooling fans. The room was a chaotic nest of tangled wires, empty delivery containers, and glowing LED strips that bled a harsh, artificial purple across the walls. This was the digital headquarters of 30-year-old Raphael Graven, known to thousands of viewers on the platform Kick as Jean Pormanove. Raphael wasn't a traditional gamer. He was a pioneer in a controversial new wave of IRL or in real-life streamers who traded their privacy and their dignity for digital currency. On this particular night, the stakes were higher than they had ever been. Raphael was in the middle of a marathon broadcast, a subathon that had been running for nearly 300 consecutive hours. He hadn't left the view of the camera for more than a few minutes at a time in nearly 2 weeks. He was a man running on nothing but caffeine and the desperate need to stay relevant in a platform that rewarded the extreme. The stream that night felt different from his usual high-energy antics. The marathon had devolved into a slow, agonizing display of human endurance. Raphael was lying on a thin mattress on the floor of his studio, the camera angled down at him from a tripod like a cold, unblinking eye. His face was sunken, his skin sallow and ghostly under the flickering purple LEDs. In the background, the sounds of his computer's Discord notifications chimed relentlessly, pings from co-streamers and donors who were participating in a humiliation challenge. They were paying money to trigger loud noises, keep him awake, or force him to perform tasks while his body was clearly shutting down. The chat was a blur of toxic encouragement. Thousands of viewers watched in real time, some mocking his exhaustion, others egging him on to reach the 350-hour mark. There was a disturbing sense of gamification. To the audience, Raphael wasn't a human being in distress, he was a character in a reality show that they controlled with their wallets. He mumbled incoherently to the camera, his eyes rolling back as he struggled to maintain a conversation with his moderators. It was a spectacle of a man falling apart in high definition. Then, the energy in the room shifted. Raphael stopped responding to the voice prompts coming through his speakers. He shifted slightly on the mattress, his breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches that were picked up by the sensitive studio microphone. He reached out a hand toward the camera, a weak, trembling gesture as if he were trying to adjust the lens or signal for help, but his arm lost strength and fell limp across his chest. He didn't move again. His eyes remained half open, staring blankly at a point just past the camera lens. For several minutes, the chat didn't realize what they were seeing. Because Raphael's content often involved faking or exaggerating his exhaustion for views, many assumed this was another act to drive up the drama. Laughing emojis and LS filled the screen. Viewers joked that he had finally rage quit life or that he was just farming sympathy for more donations. The purple lights continued to flicker, casting dancing shadows over his unmoving form. The 300-hour timer on the screen continued to count up, second by agonizing second, while the man who started it lay still. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The tone of the chat began to curdle into fear. A few viewers noticed that his chest was no longer rising and falling. The jokes died away, replaced by frantic messages in French and English asking if anyone had his physical address. His co-streamers, who had been laughing on the voice call moments before, went silent, realizing the legal weight of what was happening. The marathon had become a death watch. The digital world sat in a paralyzed state of observation. Thousands of people were watching a man die in his own bedroom, yet because of the barrier of the screen, he was as isolated as if he were on the moon. The stream didn't cut out. It stayed live for over an hour after his final movement, a haunting broadcast of a silent room and a still body. Eventually, French authorities, alerted by a viewer who had managed to track down his location, broke down the door. The camera captured the sudden burst of light from the hallway and the frantic shadows of first responders as they rushed into the frame. The broadcast was abruptly terminated by the police, leaving the screen in a state of connection lost. The aftermath sent shockwaves through the streaming world. Authorities ruled the cause of death as a combination of acute physical exhaustion and heart failure, exacerbated by the extreme conditions of the 300-hour grind. The tragedy led to a massive criminal investigation into non-assistance to a person in danger, targeting both the platform and the co-streamers who encouraged the lethal broadcast. Raphael Graven had wanted to be the most watched man on the internet. He achieved it, but only by showing the world the exact moment that show became a reality he couldn't survive. While the modern era of streaming is defined by high-definition cameras and million-dollar setups, the dangers of the grind were present long before the world knew what a subathon was. Our next story takes us back to the early, unregulated days of the platform, a time when the digital frontier was a wild west, and the pioneers were discovering, in the most tragic way possible, that the human body has a hard limit. This is the story of a man known to the early internet only as L00PY. It was the early 2010s in the United States. Streaming was still a niche subculture, a world of pixelated webcams and grainy microphones. Inside a dimly lit home office, the air was thick with the hum of a desktop computer struggling to keep up with a broadcast that had been running for days. There were no fancy ring lights or professional moderators here, just a man, his game, and a growing audience that couldn't stop watching. L00PY was a dedicated gamer who belonged to the first generation of creators on Justin.tv and the newly born Twitch. To his viewers, he was a symbol of pure, unadulterated passion. He didn't have a corporate sponsor or a polished brand, he had endurance. In an era where staying live was the only way to grow, L00PY decided to push the boundaries of what was physically possible. He embarked on a multi-day marathon, a grueling grind intended to catapult his channel into the big leagues of the burgeoning streaming world. As the stream crossed the 40-hour mark, and then the 50-hour mark, the normalcy of the broadcast began to decay. The video feed was low resolution, but you could still see the toll the marathon was taking. L00PY's movements became sluggish, his speech slurred, and his reaction times in-game began to fail. In the early days of the internet, This wasn't seen as a medical emergency, it was seen as a badge of honor. The chat was a small, tight-knit group, cheering him on with the primitive emotes of the time, unaware that they were witnessing a slow-motion collapse. The marathon finally came to an end after several days. L00PY, visibly delirious but wearing a tired smile, thanked his small community for sticking with him. He told them he was going to catch up on some much-needed sleep and that he'd see them in a few days for the next big push. He reached out, clicked that stop streaming button, and the red live indicator finally went dark. The screen turned to a static offline slate, and for a moment, the digital world was satisfied. But the next broadcast never happened. In the days following the stream, the silence on his channel became deafening. In the early era of streaming, there were no secondary social media accounts or update videos. When a streamer went silent, they simply vanished. It wasn't until weeks later that the truth filtered through the gaming forums. L00PY had passed away shortly after hitting that stop button. His body, pushed into a state of extreme sleep deprivation and physical stress, had simply given out the moment he finally allowed himself to rest. Authorities and medical experts would later point to the lethal combination of a sedentary lifestyle and acute exhaustion. When a person stays awake for that long, the blood begins to thicken, the heart is forced to pump under immense pressure, and the brain begins to misfire. For L00PY, the end didn't come while the camera was on, but it was the camera that led him to his doorstep. He had won the marathon, but he had lost the race for his life. His death sent a cold shiver through the early streaming community. It was the first canary in the coal mine moment, a warning that the pursuit of digital growth could have a very real, very permanent cost. Veteran streamers still speak his name as a cautionary tale, a reminder of a time before sleep streams or health regulations, when a man could disappear into the glow of his monitor and never come back out. L00PY's legacy isn't a collection of viral clips or high-score records. It is the grim foundation upon which modern streaming safety was built. He proved that while the internet never sleeps, the humans who power it eventually must. He was the first to show us that in the world of live broadcasting, the most dangerous thing you can do is refuse to turn the camera off. While the physical toll of exhaustion has claimed many, our next story explores a different, perhaps more haunting kind of live tragedy, one where the camera didn't just capture a sudden physical collapse, but documented the slow, public unraveling of a human mind. For this creator, the internet wasn't just a platform, it was a witness to a crisis that unfolded in real time, across multiple broadcasts, until the screen finally went black for the last time. This is the story of Desmond Amofah, known to millions as Etika. It was June 2019 in New York City. The summer air was thick and humid, clinging to the skyscrapers of Manhattan. In a high-rise apartment, the atmosphere was far from the usual high-energy Joy-Con Boys celebrations that Etika was famous for. There were no frantic reactions to Nintendo trailers or chaotic jokes with his fans. Instead, the room was filled with a heavy, vibrating tension. The glowing screen, once a source of connection and joy, had become a mirror reflecting a man in the middle of a profound mental health emergency, and he was sharing every second of it with the world. Etika was a titan of the Tier 1 streaming scene, a charismatic powerhouse who had built a massive, loyal following through sheer personality. But in the months leading up to that fateful June, his live broadcasts began to take on a disturbing tone. Fans watched, paralyzed, as he underwent several mental breakdowns live on camera. In one of the most famous and chilling incidents, thousands of viewers watched a first-person view of his own apartment being breached by a SWAT team. The flickering blue and red lights of the police cruisers danced across his walls in high definition while he continued to stream, narrating his own detention to a global audience. The grind for Etika wasn't just about hours played, it was about the psychological weight of being on for a digital crowd that often blurred the line between entertainment and genuine concern. By mid-June, the situation reached a breaking point. A final video titled "I'm Sorry" was uploaded to his channel. It wasn't a standard broadcast. It was a pre-recorded walk through the streets of New York, a city he loved, but it felt like a ghost was already narrating it. He spoke directly to his fans, apologizing for the bridges he had burned and the god complex he felt he had developed under the spotlight of internet fame. As the video premiered, the digital world went into a frenzy. This wasn't just a missed stream, this was a public goodbye. For several days, the streaming community stayed live in spirit, with thousands of fans monitoring police scanners, searching social media tags, and holding vigils in Twitch chats that refused to close. The digital world was holding its breath, waiting for a return to stream notification that would never come. The search ended on June 24. Authorities recovered Desmond's belongings on the Manhattan Bridge, and shortly after, his body was found in the East River. The news hit the streaming world like a physical blow. Etika hadn't died from a sudden accident on camera, but his death was live in every sense of the word. From the first signs of his struggle to the final upload, the entire tragedy was documented, commented on, and clipped by a world that watched him disappear in real time. His passing left a permanent scar on the culture of Tier 1 countries. It was a brutal wake-up call that the donations and likes can often mask a desperate cry for help. The Manhattan Bridge became a site of a massive, physical memorial, a place where fans left Joy-Cons, letters, and art for a man who had given everything to the screen. Etika's story is the ultimate cautionary tale of the digital age. It proved that the most dangerous part of streaming isn't the hours spent sitting down or the lack of sleep, it's the isolation that comes from being watched by millions while being truly seen by no one. He remains a legend in the community, a reminder that behind every high-energy persona is a human being who might be struggling to stay afloat in the very currents that brought them fame. While many of the names we've discussed represent a final, tragic logout, our next story is unique because it serves as the ultimate near-miss, a moment that almost became the most watched death in internet history. It is a story that illustrates how the physical body can begin to rot from the inside out while the digital persona remains alive and successful. This is the story of Aries Vieieri, the man the world knew as Fant0ml0 It was mid-2015, during the height of the first great streaming gold rush. In a high-end gaming setup in the United States, the air was thick with the heat of overclocked processors and the smell of stale energy drinks. Fant0ml0 was one of the undisputed kings of Twitch, a high-energy, bombastic personality who commanded an audience of tens of thousands. His streams were a chaotic whirlwind of high-stakes gambling and legendary gameplay. To his fans, he was invincible, a Tier 1 titan who could sit in a gaming chair for 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, and never miss a beat. But while his viewer count was climbing, his physical health was silently plummeting into an abyss. The grind of the daily 12-hour session had become a slow-motion assault on his immune system. Aries began feeling a dull, persistent pain, the kind of discomfort that most streamers dismiss as a byproduct of a sedentary lifestyle. He ignored the fever, he ignored the mounting exhaustion. In the world of top-tier streaming, taking a day off is often seen as a career suicide. The show had to go on. The tragedy nearly went live during a period of intense broadcasting. While he was active in the community, Aries's body finally crossed a point of no return. What he thought was a simple infection had spiraled into severe sepsis, a life-threatening condition where the body's response to infection begins to damage its own tissues and organs. To the audience watching the Fant0ml0 persona, he was just a bit more tired than usual. But off-camera, in the moments between his high-energy outbursts, he was beginning to die. The lived element of this story is the collective memory of the community watching a man's health fail in high definition. When he was finally forced into an emergency room, doctors discovered a massive, internal abscess that had gone septic. He was told that had he waited even a few more hours, had he finished just one more long-duration stream, he would not have survived the night. The titan of Twitch was nearly toppled not by a rival or a scandal, but by a chair and a lack of sunlight. The news of his near-fatal emergency rippled through the Tier 1 streaming world like a cold wind. For the first time, the death by exhaustion narrative wasn't a rumor from the early days of the internet, it was happening to the biggest star on the platform. It became a major catalyst for a new, somber conversation among creators. They began to talk openly about blood clots, the dangers of 12-hour sit-down sessions, and the hidden health tax of the digital grind. Aries survived, but the fan 0ml0 road who returned to the screen was a changed man. The near-death was so visceral that it led to him being frequently mistaken in internet lore for a streamer who actually passed away live. In a way, the fan 0ml0 road of the early era did die, the version that believed the human body was just an obstacle to the broadcast. His story remains one of the most important entries in this list because it serves as the ultimate what-if. It stands as a warning to every creator who thinks they are invincible behind a keyboard. It proved that you can have 50,000 people watching your every move, but no one can see the infection spreading through your blood until it's almost too late. Fan 0ml0 road's survival was a miracle, but his near-lived collapse was a message to the entire Tier 1 industry. The screen can show everything, but it can't feel the pain that happens just outside the frame. Our final story takes us into the high-stakes world of professional esports, where the pressure to perform doesn't just come from an audience, but from the crushing weight of being a pioneer. It is a story of a woman who broke through every glass ceiling in the Tier 1 gaming scene, only to find that the spotlight of fame often casts the darkest shadows. This is the story of Maria Kreling, known to the world as Remilia. It was December 2019. In the competitive gaming hubs of the United States, the atmosphere was one of transition. The year was ending, and the professional League of Legends circuit was gearing up for another massive season. Maria was a legend in this space, the first woman to ever qualify for and play in the League of Legends Championship Series, or LCS. To her fans, she was a trailblazer, a mechanical prodigy who had endured immense public scrutiny and online harassment to claim her seat at the table. But the life's tragedy of Remilia was a slow-moving one, documented through years of broadcasts where her physical and mental health were often the unspoken secondary characters of the show. Maria was an active variety streamer, but her streams often carried an undercurrent of profound weariness. The Tier 1 grind for a professional athlete is different. It is a 14-hour-a-day obsession with perfection, fueled by energy drinks and the constant, buzzing feedback of a digital crowd that could be as cruel as they were supportive. On her final streams, the atmosphere was uncharacteristically quiet. The high-octane gameplay was still there, but the person behind the keyboard seemed to be drifting. Maria had been open about the chronic pain and the psychological toll that her journey in the spotlight had taken on her. To her viewers, she was a hero who had made it, but on camera, the flickering light of the monitor revealed someone who was increasingly exhausted by the very world she had conquered. The broadcast of her life ended without warning. On December 27, 2019, Maria passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 24. There was no sudden collapse on camera, no final cryptic video. Instead, there was just a sudden, permanent silence where a pioneer used to be. The community, used to seeing her live almost daily, was met with an empty chair that would never be filled again. The reaction from the Tier 1 esports world was a mixture of grief and a deep, collective guilt. Her passing, occurring just months before the world would go into lockdown, marked the end of an era of innocence for professional gaming. It highlighted the devastating physical and emotional cost of being a first in a digital world that wasn't always ready for you. Maria's legacy remains etched into the history of esports. She proved that a woman could compete at the highest level of the most popular game on Earth, but her story also serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of those who live their lives in high definition. In the quiet hours of a December night, one of the brightest lights in the scene simply went out, proving once again that the most important parts of a streamer's life are the ones the camera can never truly capture. As we look back at these stories, a clear and chilling pattern emerges. Whether it's the physical toll of a 300-hour marathon, the invisible weight of mental health, or the sudden failure of the body under pressure, the digital world is a place where the live button can become a doorway to a tragedy. These creators didn't just entertain us, they showed us the absolute limit of the human experience in the digital age.